When I went to my first junior high school dance, there was a young lady there with whom I was smitten. And so I steeled myself. I stood up straight. I took a deep breath in. And I turned to my friend Phil and I said, "Would you go ask if she'll dance with me?" Phil, being the good friend, did cross the gymnasium, went up to the young lady, and he asked her, "Will you dance with Sal?" And she said yes. So Phil comes back across. Yes, that is one to applaud to. Phil comes back across the gym to me, and I say, "Phil, what does she say?" And he looks at him and he says, "No, she won't dance with you." And thus began my experience with junior high dances. WordPress and PHP have functions. So with a function, something goes into it. In the case of Phil, he got this message that came in, right? "Sure, I'd love to dance with Sal." That's the arguments, we call them, values coming in. And then a function returns something. In the case of Phil, he returned to me, "No, she won't dance with you." We call that the return value. So we've got a function, we've got arguments coming in, return value coming out. I love this book, Bugs Bunny's Carrot Machine. And when I think about functions, I think about this machine. In this book, Bugs Bunny builds this machine that you put trash into, the arguments, and the return value is carrots. So now we've got this carrot machine. That's our function. Now, PHP code function looks something like this. All right, we define it as a function. We give it a name. You will notice throughout this presentation, I have prefixed all of my function names with FE underscore. Reed told us a few minutes ago that that's important to avoid colliding with other function names out there. So you'll see that at the beginning of all of mine. And then in parentheses, we have the variable where the argument's going to go. So in this case, we pass in some value. It goes into that variable str. It's a common abbreviation for string. And then we're going to return that same value. So this function doesn't actually do anything. It returns the same value that comes in. I wish Phil had taken this approach. So we put apple in, we get apple out. Right? Apple argument, return value, apple. Orange goes in, orange comes out. Yes, I'd love to dance with Sal goes in. Yes, I'd love to dance with Sal comes out. The fill function. So you notice it starts out the same. We have an argument coming in, but on that return statement, our return value, we are prepending, sticking on the front, no comma. So in this case, I drop in apple. I get back no comma apple. I drop in orange. I get back no comma orange. I drop in dance. I get no comma dance. So now we've got our carrot machine. We've got our function. But we need to wire this into WordPress. Right? So how do we get this in? And we get that in with add filter. So add filter takes two things. The first thing is we tell it, where does this get applied? And the second, what function are we applying? So here we're going to apply our FEFill function. And where do we apply it? So when I think of WordPress, I think of it as a series of tubes that information travels through. And one of those tubes gets the title. It goes to the database, it looks it up, it passes it along, and it displays on your page. And as it's traveling through this tube, there's this cutout location called the title. And so I can drop something in this cutout. I can reach in and change that value as it's going through. And so that's what our function is going to do here. You can see on your left, on your right, I even practiced that, left and right. Man, it was on your left. On your left, you can see, before the filter is applied. The title of my page is About Sal Ferrarello. On the right, you can see after that filter is applied. No comma about Sal Ferrarello. Now this tube carrying the title gets used lots of different places in WordPress. And so when I envision the tube, I envision it something like this, right? So get the title is the function that does this work for us. That's what's doing the work of pulling it from the database and passing it out to display on the page. And it's going through this tube. So the word about goes in, the word about comes out. We've got the title filter cut out, but we haven't applied anything here. But when we do add that function, I imagine it like this. We drop in that function, FEFill. So now it's coming through that tube. We hit the function, it goes in. Our return value is no comma about, and that comes out the other end. So we see how that gets applied on the page, but that get the title gets used many places. So for example, a list of the recent posts. You can see on the left, we've got the post without anything changed. On the right, with the filter applied, we can see it now with the modifications there. Even on the back end, we've got this filter coming into play. So this is the back end. If you look closely, you can see all of my titles have that no comma on the front. We are changing the behavior. Refrigerator. So I like to imagine physical things because programming doesn't really make sense to me. So when I think about this in filters, I think about my refrigerator. My refrigerator has this hole at the bottom. And if you don't put anything in this hole, it's got a water line. The water line comes in, it goes right up, and it comes out this dispenser. I can get a glass of water. Now, in this hole, I can put a filter, and that changes things. So the water line comes in, and instead of going right out, it takes this detour, goes through the filter, and then comes back out. And so the filter is affecting that change, much like these filters we're adding in WordPress. So what else can we do with these filters? In this case, we want to add a message to our login screen. So on our login screen, there's an area where messages can be output. Most of the time, there's no message there. Sometimes it says, you typed in the wrong password, or there's no user account by that name. So this information is traveling through this tube to display on the page, and there's a cutout. There's an opportunity. These cutouts are called hooks, right? Reed was telling us about these hooks. We've got these cutouts. The hook, this hook is named login message. So now we're going to say we want to apply this new function we have up here, fe login mg. And so that function takes in the value coming in, returns it, and again, we're going to prepend something. In this case, we're prepending use your words wisely. So if I take a look at my login page now, I get this use your words wisely. So in that message area, whatever was being passed through, we stuck that on there. You'll also notice that we are prepending it, and we still have our original message. So if we did have a message that said, hey, your password is wrong, or there's no user by that name, that information is still getting passed through. It's just happening right after our message. Another thing we can do, admin footer text. Again, another place we have an opportunity to change something. So yet another tube flowing through WordPress. I told you there's lots of tubes. So it's flowing through WordPress. In this case, it spits out some information on your admin pages in the footer. Now I do something a little different here. You'll notice that argument comes in, goes in that variable original, and then I take that variable original and I ignore it. I'm not using it. I'm returning something completely different. And I'm returning this site created by Sal with WordPress. And so it looks like this. Before the filter, there's a little message at the bottom in the admin section. Thank you for creating with WordPress. And now I've got my own message down there. I could add markup. I could put a link in there. I could encourage clients who have questions to follow up with me rather than another developer. So it's an opportunity for some branding there on the back end of the site. Great. So we've got this code. We're talking all about it. Where do we put it? There's a couple answers to that. The first one, functions.php. So in every theme you use for WordPress, there is a file called functions.php. This is not always the best place to add this filter code. And the reason why is you are tying it to your theme. I find that many of the sites I work on, even if I change the theme, I still want this functionality. Well, if I put it in functions.php, it goes away with the theme. So if you have filters that you want to apply that are specific to this theme, great place for it. Often I ask myself, do I want this to continue to exist even if they change themes? And when the answer is yes, the most common thing I do is write a custom plugin. Reed was just taking us through that, writing a custom plugin, which sounds a little daunting, but as Reed showed us, it's pretty simple code. The code snippets we looked at could be plugins if we added some comments up at the top, like Reed showed us. There's a third place that we can put things called the MU plugins directory. The MU plugins directory is the best kept secret in WordPress. So MU plugins. Many of you have probably SFTP'd into your site, taken a look, got your folders there, and so MU plugins would be a directory inside WP-content. At this point, I imagine many of you are saying to yourselves, hang on, Sal, hang on. I have gone into my website, I've gone into WP content, I've seen directories in there like plugins, themes, uploads, some that were added by other plugins, but I've never seen this MU plugins directory. And in fact, it is not there by default. However, WordPress is hardwired to look for it. So if you create it, WordPress will check it out. And what this area does, anything in MU plugins, any PHP file, will be automatically executed. Very much like code you dropped in functions.php, this code will happen. You don't have to turn anything on, like turning on a plugin. You put it in there, it gets executed. So this gives us the same advantage we had of going with functions.php. However, if we change themes, still keeps working. So this is a great place to add code, particularly if it's code you want to make sure that your client cannot turn off, as they could with a plugin. What else can we do with filters? We've got another tube traveling through WordPress where it grabs the content out of the database. Right? So we had our blog post, we've got our title, now we've got that whole section of content. Could be very long, but it's going to take all of that, jam it into one variable, and send it down this tube. And in the tube, we've got our hook, we've got our cutout, and this cutout's called the content. So now, in this cutout, I'm applying my function that takes in my argument, content, and in this case, I'm appending, putting on the end, a block quote that says my personal opinion. So oftentimes you may be working for someone who says, hey, let's make sure that people don't think your personal blog has anything to do with us as your employer. And so in this case, you can add that to the bottom of your posts, and it says my personal opinion. Now the nice thing here is I could have gone into this post and added that. However, by doing this with a filter, I just added this to every single post on my site. All of them. And if I want to take it away, I can take away the filter and it goes away. Or if I want to update it, I can update it and it applies to all of them. So it's a great opportunity to apply this wherever you want it. Comments. Comments are an interesting animal inside WordPress. And one, I didn't understand at first. And one of the things that threw me off is there is a setting in WordPress for turning comments on or off. Interestingly, that setting only affects new posts that you create, not posts that already exist. So what I see sometimes is you create a blog, you start writing, you get about 10 posts in, and they all have the comments open, and you suddenly realize, I don't want to deal with comments. And so you go and you turn it off. And that's great. When you write blog post number 11, comments are turned off. However, those first 10, the comments are still turned on for them. Okay? It doesn't go back and retroactively change those, only new ones you're making. So you could go back through the 10 of those and turn off the comments, not a big deal. But if you've got 1,000, that's pretty miserable. So there's a filter for that. When WordPress is deciding, hey, do I show this comment box for people to type in? It goes and it looks in the database and it gets a value, true or false. True, put the comment box there. False, don't. And it sends it down the tube. Going down the tube, we've got a hook, a cutout called comments_open. And so here I'm going to drop in a function and I'm going to say, hey, drop it in a function, return false. Now you'll notice here, I have not defined this function, return false. This is a cool thing. WordPress gives this to us. WordPress has already defined a number of functions that we're welcome to use. And return false takes whatever's coming in and returns false. So true is coming in, return false. False, return false. Doesn't matter what's coming in, we're going to return false. That's what's always coming out here. So now comments open, return false. All the comments on my website are closed. Now, this doesn't actually change anything in the database. So one of the other nice things we can do with this is if we remove this, everything goes back the way it was. So I've got a blog, I've got 5 posts with comments open and 5 posts with comments closed. I'm about to go away for a week, and I don't want to deal with comments for this week. I add this filter, and now all of my comments are closed. I come back at the end of the week, I get rid of this filter, and it goes back to 5 posts with the comments open, 5 posts with the comments closed, just the way it was. Modifying your RSS feeds. RSS feeds are great. I follow a number of people and their RSS feeds. I see some of them here in this room. And so it's a great way to get content and read it. As a publisher, RSS feeds are kind of a mixed blessing because people reading your content are missing out on all the other stuff you're trying to show them. Maybe you've got a sidebar with calls to action. Hey, go spend money. That helps me. You don't get that in the RSS feed. You just get the content. So we can tap in here. We've got another tube. And actually the tube we talked about with the content is coming along. We saw that hook for the content, that cutout, and then the tube kind of splits, right? So here it goes to display on the page, and here it goes to display in the feed, and this one going to the feed has its own cutout as well. This one's called the content feed, so we can drop a function in there. This function takes in the content, and again, we're going to, in this case, we are appending, sticking on the end, this hiring blurb. Hire Sal, it says. So now every article in my feed, everything you read, is going to end up with this content on the end. So this is a cool trick. By the way, all of these code snippets I do have available, and I will make them available at the end of this, so you can download the code right from there. So if you're scribbling furiously, you don't have to. I promise it'll be available. So add filter. We've been using add filter. We keep doing it over and over again. So let's look at it a little more closely. So the first thing we add is that hook name, the name of the cutout. Where are we applying this? And the second one is the function name. What are we applying there? What are we dropping in to make those changes? Interestingly, add filter can take 2 additional arguments. So we've got priority and number of arguments to pass in. The default values are 10 and 1 respectively. These are optional. We don't need them. Most of the time, I don't end up using them, but there are some cases where they really come in handy. Let's take a look at priority first. So priority tells us when to execute it on that hook, that cutout. So we can apply more than one function in that cutout. Here I've got one that adds a colon and one that adds a parenthesis. So we've got this title. That's the cutout we're going with again. Title comes out of the database, coming down the tube, and I have dropped in colon function and the parenthesis function. So it's coming in, I get to the first one, I add a colon, the second one I add a parenthesis, and then it comes out. So you can see up here, I've got a colon and a parenthesis, and it looks like a smiling face. Aww. Now, I've added the priorities here as 10. That's the same thing as if I left them out. Those are the default values. I'm going to make one small change. I changed one of my priorities to 5. So now I've added these 2 functions, colon and parenthesis, priorities 10 and 5. So the message is coming down, we're getting ready to apply these, and WordPress gets to this hook, the title, and it says, okay, I'm going to apply these 2 functions. This one is a lower priority, so we're going to do that one first. So add the parenthesis first, then add the colon, send it out. So we've got about Sal coming in, and this time we've changed the order we apply them, and we get the parenthesis first and then the colon, and so now it's frowning. So priority is important when you've got multiple filters. It matters what's getting applied first or second. In terms of filter priorities, 10 most of the time works out. As I said, usually I don't find I need to add a specific priority. If I do need something to happen early, I'll drop it down to maybe 5. If I need to happen late, maybe 15. That gives me some room to sneak something in between if I need to later. The fact is there's lots of space. You can even put in negative numbers for priority if you really want to make sure it happens early. You can put in huge numbers if you want to make sure it happens last, like 9,999. Generally, you don't need to be at one of those extremes. So you're traditionally better off sticking in those closer values. All right, so we looked at priority. There's another value after that, which tells us the number of arguments to pass in. So here, we're going to look at the comments open filter again. So database, true or false value, comments are open, coming through. We got the tube, comments open, hook, our cutout, and we apply this function, fe no page com for comments. I had to go with short function names, so they fit up here. Again, my priority is 10, the default, but now I'm telling it I want 2 arguments. So in addition to that true or false value that's coming down the tube, I get this other value kind of passed along with it that I can look at and use. How do I know what value I'm getting? I read the documentation. And in the documentation, it tells me that the comments open filter can pass 2 arguments, the first one being open or not, so true or false, the second one being the post ID that we're looking at. So now we know what post we're looking at. So I'm going to do something here. I'm going to take that post ID. Now I know which one we're talking about. I'm going to go look up, what kind of post is this? Oh, hey, I get my post type. And now I'm going to say, if this post type is a page, return false. So we've got this coming down the tube. Maybe it's true, maybe it's false. We look at it. Oh, this is a page. False. I want my comments closed. No comments on pages. Otherwise, send through whatever value you gave me. Don't make a change. Prior to WordPress 4.3, pages had comments by default. And then once 4.3 came out, they don't. But again, like the other settings, that only affects everything being created from there out. So if you already have pages with comments on them, but don't want the comments on those pages, this code will make sure the comments on those pages are all closed. The comments open documentation is where I learned those are the 2 arguments that I can get passed in there. So WordPress core filters. Reed mentioned these and remind us that there are a lot of them. There are over 1,300 WordPress core filters. So clearly we're only scratching the surface of what we can do with these. In addition to all of those, plugins often have filters too, which gives us even more opportunities to make these changes. Now, you may have heard people tell you don't hack core, by which they mean do not modify the core WordPress files. And the reason that's a bad idea is when you hit update, all your changes get overwritten and they're gone. This is how we affect changes in WordPress core without modifying the WordPress core code. So if I add this code over my MU plugins, I've changed the behavior of WordPress, I hit update on WordPress, I get the latest version, my changes are still living over here in MU plugins, WordPress is good about keeping their filters consistent, and so I'm still affecting the same change. So this is a great way to modify behavior without doing it in a way where you say, I can't update WordPress core, otherwise it's going to break. So how do we find these filters, right? We've got 1,300 some of them in core, and then they're in plugins. So a couple of options. Codex, which is the official WordPress.org documentation. Hooker.io is a good website for listing hooks on it. And the third one, my favorite actually, is to read the source code. And that's a little daunting at first. But once you get in there, you will see this apply filters in there. And anywhere you see apply filters, that's telling you this is a cutout in this tube. This is our chance to modify something. So I'd like to talk about some times that filters have really, really helped me. Stop Emails plugin. I have a plugin that I have written. It's on the .org repository, and it is called the Stop Emails plugin, and it stops emails. I wrote this because I found myself working on client sites, and I would copy it over to staging, and I'd make some change that would generate an email. The client would get the email and say, what the heck is going on? What's this email? Oh, no, that's over on the staging site. That's not on your, I made the, you know what, let's just turn those emails off. So now I can make that copy, turn off all the emails, do whatever I need to do, and they're not getting that information over there. So big help, really like it, that's great, until somebody said, hey, Sal, I was using BuddyPress and emails were still going out. Well, the plugin's called Stop Emails. So if the emails are still going out, clearly we need to address something. And so I did, all right? I said, well, why is this going out? So the way my plugin works is WordPress has a function called WP Mail. And my function says anything going into WP Mail, stop it from being sent out. Well, digging into BuddyPress, it turns out that BuddyPress has their own code for sending emails and uses that by default. Okay, great. Now I got to stop it for WP Mail and stop it for the BuddyPress one. And as I looked at their documentation, I saw they have a filter. BP email use WP Mail. And by default, coming through that tube is false. Don't use WP Mail. Use our own BuddyPress mail. Well, I hopped in here. I added a filter. I said, okay, when it's coming down that tube, hop in and return true. Again, built-in WordPress function, return true. It's going to force that to go through. Great. So now, BuddyPress, when this code is running, uses WP Mail. My plugin stops anything going out WP Mail. It stops BuddyPress emails going out. I even have a link in the slides here to the actual commit where I made this change. And I love this because I had one filter and I managed to fix this bug. So, good stuff. Passwords from Magento. This was an interesting case. I had a client, and the client had a Magento store with lots of customers on it, and they wanted to move to WordPress and WooCommerce. Okay, so I'm helping that. We're moving the clients over. And they said, well, we still want them to be able to log in. We don't want to reset passwords. Make sure they can still log in. Well, that gets tricky. And to understand that, we need to step back and talk about how passwords are stored. We don't store passwords in what we call plain text. So if you type in your password, that password actually isn't stored in the database, which is a good thing. Because if it were and someone could read the database, they get a list of usernames and a list of passwords that go together, and then they head to the local banking website and they try them. Username, password, username, password. Some people reuse their passwords. Don't. Now, we still want to try and prevent this, right? Even though that's bad form to reuse it. We want to try and prevent it. And so, people far smarter than I came up with this great idea. And they use something called a hashing function. So, for example, if my password is correct horse battery staple, we take it. It goes into a function as an argument. The return value is this line of gibberish that spits out. Sometimes we call this a hash. So you get this line of gibberish that comes out and gets stored. Two things about hash functions that are interesting. One, you can't go backwards. So I can't take this line of gibberish and go, oh yeah, that line of gibberish, if I do that backwards, I get correct horse battery staple. Doesn't work that way. Only one way. And 2, if I put in the same thing into that hashing function, I always get that same line of gibberish, that same hash. So what we do now, what WordPress does, is when you type in your password, they run it through that hashing function, they get the line of gibberish, and they store that line of gibberish. So then when you want to log in, you type in your password, they run it through the hashing function, they get a line of gibberish. They compare it to the stored line of gibberish. Oh, it's the same lines of gibberish. They must have typed in the same password. Great, let them in. It's really brilliant. So great, now we're in business. Problem. Magento and WordPress use 2 different hashing functions. There's actually lots of different hashing functions out there, and they can't use the same one, can they? So that means that if I take a Magento hash and move it over here to WordPress, when they type it in, it runs through the WordPress hashing function, I get a line of gibberish that does not match the line of gibberish that same password made in Magento. Ugh. Solution? Filters. When WordPress checks and says, hey, does this password match? It gets a true or a false value. And you know what it does with that true or false? Sends it through a tube. So it's going through the tube, and that tube's got a cutout. It's got a hook in it called check password. So I drop my function in here. So now I got a true or a false coming down this tube. Check password gets here, and I've told it I want 2 arguments, not just 1. So I get a true or false, and that second argument I get is the plain text password they typed in. So now I get the plain text password. I run it through the Magento hashing function. It spits out the Magento gibberish version. I compare it to the Magento gibberish version I have on file. It matches. I change and return a true, and they get to log in. So I got to move all these users from a Magento site to a WordPress site without ever knowing their passwords, but they can still continue to log in with their passwords. And this was a very exciting day for me. Big win. Big win. So we took a look at lots of different things we can do with filters. As we mentioned, there are so many more things we can do with filters. But here's just what we got to touch on today. Lots of cool stuff. I do have some resources here in the links. The first one is downloadable WordPress filter examples. That is a GitHub repository. It has each of these code samples. Sometimes they have a few more lines in there just to flush them out, and they're all downloadable from there. All right, so that's available for you. I will be tweeting that out after this talk, and I've got a couple other resources in there for you. I thank you very much for your time. I'm Sal Ferrarello. I do work as Iron Code Studio. That is the URL to these slides. I will be tweeting them out, however, from my Twitter account, which is Sal Code. Thank you very much for your time.